The gap is here. The Flexbox gap has finally arrived for all browsers. Let's have a look. Okay, so it's a quick look at a feature that's just dropped in all browsers, or the majority of browsers. For the longest time it's been a bit partial, and that's just the gap property in Flexbox, which is super valuable. Let's have a look at why. If you traditionally do some sort of layout, let's do container, and then I don't know, we'll make 5 divs, which is like boom. And then if we did display grid, for instance, and then inside each one we did BG, no, a light blue. Boom. On the parent here, we can set a gap property of like 10 pixels, and it just knows instantly to create divisions between them, which is super helpful. Certainly if you're using CSS Grid, you're thinking more about a parent level or container level about how we want to orientate things on the page. You don't want to mess around with like margins and divisions where things could mess up, or you'd have that kind of margin collapse thing. It's just so much of a hassle. So here it's just lovely to go like, well, all elements will just have this gap property and we can divide them. And it's one of those rare things, even though Flexbox came along a lot sooner, as soon as that dropped, that was the thing people kind of wanted on Flexbox. Like, yeah, it'd be nice to just set a gap. It's annoying that Flexbox has never had that. You've been able to easily position elements to the top, the bottom, or evenly space them, but never just say, give every element a 10 pixel gap. Flexbox gap arrived in Chrome a while back, and it's been around for a good year or so, which has been helpful. But it didn't really work in Firefox, I think maybe Edge, definitely not IE. It wasn't widely supported enough that you could just generally use it out the box. The way you would use that traditionally is those supports. So if you're not aware of these, you can do like @supports and then put something like gap 10 pixel and then put your setting in there. And what that just means is that if the browser recognizes whatever's in these brackets, then it will apply it. And so it means that only browsers that support gap property will do this, and then those that don't. You could also do, I think, supports not. So you could do specific code in here for Firefox. Say if you don't know what gap 10 pixel means, then we'll do in here like, margin 10 pixels or whatever. So you could work around it easily. However, because gap is recognized in CSS Grid, it's a rare situation where a property has the same name but kind of works differently. You've got gap for Flexbox and gap for CSS Grid. So when you give it a supports query, it says, do you recognize gap 10 pixels? It would assume you're talking about CSS Grid and say, yeah, sure. And then we'll try and implement it, and it would fall down because it didn't work for Flexbox. It's one of these incredibly rare situations where it would respect the property, but actually not know what to do with the property. So for the longest time, you couldn't get Flexbox gap, and you couldn't even tell the browser to work around Flexbox gap. So you would just basically have to give set margins and just fix and deal with things. Anyway, that's a convoluted journey you don't need to know about, but it's exciting to know we now have Flexbox gap. Do away with this. Make this gap. And boom, here we go. Easy, smooth gaps between things. It's kind of interesting also because I've always felt the difference between Flexbox and Grid is that Flexbox, more of the control seems to be on the individual elements. With Grid, you're thinking about, a lot of your settings are about how many columns, how many rows, how many will they span. The benefits are that you can kind of really structure how things will move around a page. You can name areas, you can combine different units. You can use that free space ability to just fill up availables and combine different percentages, pixels, units, whatever. With Flexbox, it seems often you're setting flex grow properties to say how much space am I going to fill up, how am I going to move around my container. It feels a lot more like you solve problems on the element level. Gap is a property which perhaps just been a missing outlier for a while to just set a simple gap, but shifts maybe that Flexbox is also becoming a leader, not just for those individual element style stuff, but if you also just want to control a lot of the layout from the parent, gap will go a long way in helping for that. So it's a tip in Flexbox's favor. I still think that it's not an either or. You just find the one that suits better the layout you're trying to build, but yeah, it's worth knowing. You get gap in both now. Anyway, that's all today. Yeah, please leave any comments or likes or those things, and we'll catch you again soon.